Good morning, or good day, good afternoon, good evening. How's everyone's day going so far? In case you're joining without having seen the class registration, we're going to be painting some citrus type grapefruits. You could also do the same thing with whatever citrus that you wanted to paint. Oh, me too. I hope it saves as well. This is a fun class. Good news is I have already filmed the little tutorial as well for this, so I will be posting that after class, so there will be a couple different options just in case. All right, so today we're going to be painting. I'm going to be painting this twice today so that you can see it a couple different times. And I'm going to have a couple different options. The first thing I want you guys to help me decide, one of them I will be painting with my palette, but you guys get to help me choose the second palette. I've got a couple different options today. We could use the Core palette. This is actually their dried palette. I've only used this a couple times. This is one option. We also have Winsor Newton as an option. The Viva. We could do some good old-fashioned Prang or the Koi watercolor palette. So help me choose the second one that we're going to use today. And also, just so you know, I'm going to use, this is Canson XL 140 pound that I'm going to do on this one. I'm going to tape that one down, and then I'm also going to be using the Arches. And this is the Rough Grain. All right, I think we have two for Viviva, maybe one for Core, and one for Koi. 3 Viviva. Yeah, it doesn't like to spell Viviva out, does it? Or actually, that's 2 for Viviva, 2 for Koi, Winsor Newton. So far, we're tied between Viviva and Koi. Anybody else have any? Oh, another one for Koi. Maybe Koi's eking out. All right, I think we're going to do Koi as our second palette. So for today's class, you're going to need, we will be doing some sketching, so you're going to need a pencil and an eraser. You'll also want some round things for us to trace, and if you want, you can also, if you've got masking fluid, you don't absolutely need it. On one I'm going to do it, and one I'm not going to. You'll also need, I'm going to be using a round brush. This is a size 12 round brush. I've got some paper towels, I've got my water, I've got my palettes over to the side, and I'm also going to start by taping this down. So yeah, I'm going to be working on 2 different ones here. Let me start. I gotta grab the end of this tape. Come on. I know you're right there. Why is it such a humbling experience to try to get tape sometimes? It's like catching a ping pong ball. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to do that. They're so light, and I swear there's like no way to catch a ping pong ball and look cool. Alright, so I'm going to start by taping this down. Just like this. So I have some core tube paints that I absolutely love. I bought the pans just to try them out, and I don't really have a solid opinion on them yet because I haven't used them quite enough to really know how I feel about them, and they are pretty pricey. Now, if they end up being as good as the tube paints, they would be worth it, but I don't quite have an opinion yet. All right. So, let's actually start with a quick sketch. As you can kind of see on these, we're going to mix up and we're going to have some half slices, some rounds, and some of the whole fruit as well. So let's start with some of the whole fruit. And one of the things I'm going to start with is I'm just going to use this same tape thing, and I'm going to trace a couple rounds here. So this is going to be one of my whole fruits. And let's make another one here. I like to have some of mine kind of going off the page. Slightly different sizes. And we're also going to be having some of these be the slices too. These don't need to be perfect circles, so you can also come in here and kind of change the shape of them if you want them to be a little more oblong. This is going to be one of my pieces of the whole fruit. And I also like to add in the leaves on some of these. So let's make this one have that little nubbin on there, and then let's just make some sort of a leaf shape just to kind of block this out. You have the M. Graham watercolors. Oh, I haven't seen those ones. Let's also make this one another one of the whole ones. And add it in a leaf. Maybe this one has 2 leaves. This one I want to be one of these slices, or the halves where it's going to actually expose those inner segments. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this inner circle, and I'm also going to just lightly sketch around kind of that rind area. Grapefruits actually have a pretty thick rind, so you can be a little bit thicker with this. And then in order to get the segments, we want to do a couple things. We want to turn this into a little bit of a pizza pie. I'm going to cross a bunch of these. So I'm going to make it into the segments like this, and then I'm going to round all the corners. Kind of give myself a guideline, because these little segments actually do have a little space in between them, and they also are a little rounded, and that's going to give us a little more of a real look. Hello, hello. All right, right in here, I'm going to do a half slice, so I'm just going to trace half of this. And then I'm going to make my line here. I'm going to put my rind on the inside. And again, I'm going to segment this out. And round those segments. Let's make another one over here. You don't have to place yours exactly where I'm placing mine. You can kind of just fill up the page. We just want to get some decent coverage of some of these, and I personally like when they go a little bit off the page. None of this needs to be perfect. If you really don't like having pencil lines, I personally don't mind it. I kind of like how it looks. But if you don't like that, you've got a couple options. You could use watercolor pencils, or that will kind of disappear as you do paint this. Or the other option is after you draw this, you can take something like a kneaded eraser and lightly just kind of press so that you're going to remove most of the pigment. I keep mine partially so that you guys can see it, and also since I don't really mind. just going to keep it there. Now on this one, I am going to be putting some masking fluid before I do the sketch on the other one. So there, I've got most of this out. Then I'm going to be putting in a couple little highlights because I like to leave a few areas. We are going to be covering these individual slices, but if we leave a couple little spots, it will kind of look like some reflections. And the way that I like to add in my masking fluid is I use this Grumbacher Misket, and then I have a ruling pen. You can use a ruling pen for a ton of different things. You could also use those little silicone paintbrushes. Those work really well as well. And I'm just going to mark out a couple on each slice. You don't have to do this one. On the other one, I'm not going to. So if you don't have this, you don't have to. The key here is to be light with this. We don't want too many, but we want a couple. Just to kind of allude to some of those highlights that might be within the grapefruit. You absolutely could mask the pith if you're worried about that. In general, and I didn't do this perfectly, obviously, but that's kind of the fun thing about watercolor, but in general, I try to just avoid it. So, you could choose to mask off the pith area if you want to make sure you really don't put anything there. The other option is to treat it kind of as an exercise of trying to maintain that white space, which is, one of the hardest things about watercolor. Sometimes is just maintaining that white space. Now we do need this to dry as well, so these are little bits of this, so this won't take too long to dry. I am curious, since I haven't masked the pith before, if that would end up taking a really long time to dry and make it hard to follow along in this lesson. So you might need to use kind of your best judgment on that. All right. Okay, so here's my first sketch. Moogie's hair wants to stay on there. I'm going to set this one to the side, and I'm going to do a very similar thing over here on this side, on this piece of paper. Probably only going to be able to get 1 or 2 whole fruit on this one. This is a much smaller piece of paper, but that's okay. So let's do 1 here, and I'm being really light with the pencil, making it a little irregular of a shape. And let's add in that little button. What is this called where it connects that little like star-shaped thing on different citrus fruits? What is that called? Does anybody know? All right, I'm going to add in one of those center segments here. Oop, I guess I'm going to have my pith on the outside here, the rind. Again, I'm going to round those segments. If you're brand new to my classes, my name is Lacey. I'm the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts. We do live watercolor classes every Saturday. A face-up wedge. Can you describe that a little bit more? What do you mean, a face-up wedge? I'm going to put a little one over here, little wedge. But the way we do my classes is you can paint along with whatever you feel like painting. And again, thank you everyone for helping each other out in the comments. I really appreciate that. I'm going to do another whole fruit here, but it's going to be off the page a little bit. But the way we do this is I usually paint whatever we're painting a few different times. You can choose to follow along with as many of the ones that I'm doing as you want to or you have time for. But I do it so I can demonstrate on a couple different supplies, as well as it allows me to show you a couple different things. Like the rind on the table. Meet up. So, okay. I'm having trouble visualizing that. I think I know what you mean. The general shape of that, what would that general shape be? Let me grab a little scrap of paper. So if the right, like let's say this is the table here, or I guess the table is, we're facing down. So if we were seeing like a wedge, we would see this here. We would see a couple lines like this. It would also probably come out like this. And we would see a little bit of that rind. I don't think this is going to be as visually interesting personally. The other thing you could try to do is a wedge that's kind of a little bit of both. So you could start with that general wedge shape like this, and if it's resting here, you would want a little, this would come down like this, and then it would disappear beyond there. And then you would see those different segments in there, which would kind of do a little bit of that. But yeah, I think I'd need to actually look at a picture of that off the top of my head. Having trouble visualizing that. Your 7-year-old is painting with us today? Oh, how fun. All right, let's add in another one here. And this is going to be another inner segment one. Let's actually cut that off here so it looks like it's a half slice. And I'm rounding these again. And this one I'm not going to put the masking fluid on so that we can try a couple different things. All right, so we've got our 2 different sketches. We are waiting for the masking fluid to dry on these. Mine is drying pretty well. I've got a couple spots that definitely need to wait a little bit more. In general, you do typically want to wait a couple hours before this, but with small amounts of it, you can usually push this. Like this is dry enough right there. But let's actually start. I'm going to put, let's start with our koi pans, and let's paint that on this one here. So if you do have koi pans, you do want to actually open this up, and you want to pre-wet everything. Just to let it kind of soak in and get ready. She created her own art studio. That's so fun. I'm going to grab, I didn't remember that this was so dirty, so I'm going to grab a little mixing well so that we have something we can actually mix some of these colors up kind of on the go. And I'm going to start with, oh, I wanted to add in a little leaf here too, a little nubbin and a little leaf. Just to kind of give it a little more. Let's have another one that kind of falls behind. Can you blow dry frisket? I kind of think so, although it's not something I've done. So I don't know. All right, I'm going to put this here. This is just going to, I'm not going to mix up large amounts of color today, but I'm going to just kind of use some of the top parts and some of here to kind of mix some of these colors together on the fly. And I want to start with, let's start with this whole fruit here. And let's think about this a little bit. So I like to do a couple different things when I'm painting my citrus. One is the general tone. So you could turn this into something like oranges if you wanted to, just by changing the colors a little bit. But I'm going to kind of be going for some of those peachy colors. Although if you actually look at a grapefruit, it's going to be kind of peachy. It's also going to have some hints of some yellows. And then obviously if we want to make it a little more dimensional, it's going to have some shadow on the bottom. So the main colors I'm going to be using is I'm going to mix up some sort of a peachy color. I'm also going to be dropping in some more yellows. I'm going to be also using purple as my shadow line because that's going to kind of mix in nicely, but also kind of bring that down, tone down around the bottom and create the illusion of a shadow. And one other thing I'm going to do is we have a couple options here. We want a bit of a highlight, so you want to choose where your highlight's going to be. I typically tend to put it kind of in the upper third either side. This one feels like it should be here, which means that the light would be shining like this, and so my shadow is going to be kind of directly opposing where my highlight's going to be. And you can either avoid putting watercolor there for the highlight, or I'm going to do something a little different that I'll show you in a minute. All right, so let's mix up. I'm using this koi pan in order to make this kind of peachy color. I'm going to grab a little of this orange. It is the 74, I think, and then I'm going to dip into a little bit of that second over red color, and then let's grab some of this pink magenta color. And let's get a little tester strip just so that we have an idea of the color we've just mixed up. It's still a little bit too dark, so I'm going to put in a little bit of water here. And it's also not really very peachy. So I'm going to add in a little more of that magenta type color. And we're a little bit too red, so I'm going to just dip my brush in water and smooth that out. Maybe a little more yellow. And a little more of that peach color. We're getting closer to that general color here. A little more of that peach. Once I thin this out, I think that's going to be a pretty decent color to start with. All right, so I'm going to put this over the majority of this. I'm going to kind of concentrate this in a bit of a circle here. I'm going to go between putting that color in and then also just dipping my brush in the water to kind of thin it out because some of these colors are not quite what I wanted them to be, and it's mainly just because of the saturation level. So I'm going to avoid some of that area. I'm also going to grab a little more of that magenta type color, drop that in a couple areas, and I'm also going to be dipping straight into a little bit of this yellow just to add in a couple areas here. And a little more of that peachy color. As I move down, I'm going to wet this bottom part here. Then I'm going to dip straight into that purple color. Take a little water. I'm going to pull that up here so we get a bit of a shadow. The last thing I'm going to do for this first layer is I'm going to wash my brush off, and then I'm going to actually kind of smooth that together so that we get a bit of that highlight, but it isn't so harsh. And you can smooth out any edges that are a little bit strange. I'm going to leave that like that for my first layer. And that's going to kind of be the basic background. I typically do a lot of my citrus, the round ones, in a couple layers, just to kind of give them the same feel. Let's do the same thing on this one here, because I've got another whole fruit over here. And I think I need a little more of that peachy or magenta color in here. And this one, I'm going to make my highlight here again. So I'm going to start by putting some of that down, putting a little more water in my brush, and just kind of moving that all around this area. I'm going to grab a little more of that kind of orangey color, drop that in. Maybe drop in a little more of that magenta on certain areas and dip into a little of that yellow. Ooh, that's too much in my brush. I can always put a little water in. Bring that all the way down over here. And again, I'm going to put in some of that purple kind of along this edge. If you need to soften any of those areas, you can always dip into a little water while everything's still nice and wet. And just kind of smush them together. And again, my last step is going to be taking a damp brush and just kind of filling in that highlight that I reserved earlier. Oh shoot, I hope it's not freezing. Do I have... It says I have a good connection. I wonder if that'll come through in the recording if it comes through. Alright, so here's where we are currently at with these ones here. The other thing I want to do so that I have some of the same colors, since I've mixed up some kind of specialty colors, is I'm going to do this on the rinds as well. So I'm going to take some of that kind of peachy color I mixed up, and I'm just going to lightly place that around the outsides. This is where we're going to kind of be practicing maintaining that white space because we don't want it to fully come in. I am going to vary this color a little bit by adding in a little more of the orangey color in a couple areas. And again, I'm also going to dip into some fresh water and just kind of soften right along those edges. We could also drop in a little yellow into a couple different areas if we wanted to kind of keep it all within the same palette here. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that it's going to just stop freezing. I don't really know what to do at this point. Is the freezing meaning that you guys are a little bit further behind? Do I need to slow down a little bit? All right, I'm going to put those same colors along the other rinds too. The outside line. I'm going to add in some of that peachy color in a couple areas. Maybe a little of that yellow. You could also drop in a little of that purple if you wanted to. Oh good, I'm glad that it comes back in sequence. All right, on this one too. I'm going to put a little tiny bit of purple just to kind of shadow this over here. And again, I'm going to wash my brush off, tap it so it's just damp, and then I'm going to soften some of these lines here. Okay, good. I'm glad it's not, I mean, I'm sure it's kind of irritating, but I'm glad it's not completely impeding. Okay, next thing I want to do on this one is we're going to be layering in different little pulp pieces. So if you need to kind of practice this before you go on straight onto the page, we want to mix up a nice, we're going to vary these colors inside with each layer. So we're going to be playing with white space, but we're just going to be taking the tip of a brush and making little pulp type shapes. So if you need to get a little practice, grab a little tester strip and just make a couple of those little lines. Then using whatever color you want, you might want something that's about this darkness or a little bit lighter. We're going to modify this a little bit as we go through this painting because we want to add in a whole bunch of layers of these pulp here so that we can reflect some different colors of the light. And just in each one of these little segments, I'm just going to do a couple of these. Just a few little peach pulp segments. Leaving white space in between so that we can layer this on and have a whole bunch of different colors reflected within those pulp areas. Just like this. So the peach color I made, I used the orange in the Koi palette. I added in a bit of red and then also some of the magenta color, which is the pink color that's right next to that purple color. Unfortunately, my palette is so messy I can't really read the numbers. And then I added quite a bit of water to it in order to desaturate that color, because that's how we're going to kind of get the peachiness of it all. Okay. So examining this, what we need to do on this painting, we're going to actually wait on this one specifically. I'm going to go over basically the same things on this one, but using a slightly different palette in just a second. But the reason why I'm going to set this aside is I'm going to be needing to do a couple different things. One, I am going to want to put a second layer of color on top of these just to either bump up some of the pigment or change some of where the placement of some of these are, some of the strokes and things like that. Like I don't like this harsh line right here, so I want to be able to soften that, but I don't want to do that right now. I want to actually wait until it's on a dry layer. I also need to add in these leaves, and I could add in this one because it doesn't touch this one, but if I added in this one, because this is not dry, it would bleed the green into that nice peachy color. So I actually want to wait to do that until that's dry. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this color I've mixed up here a little bit. I'm either going to make it more pink or more yellow for my next layer of these, but I don't really want these to bleed together. I want them to be separated. So I need those to dry as well. So I'm actually going to set this one to the side, and let's repeat all those same steps we just did, but on our different paper and using our different palette so you can see a couple different things. All right, let me move this to the side. So the light source is kind of from the top. I mean, I'm kind of mixing this up a little bit. I'm kind of imagining these floating in space almost. So they're not necessarily, in my imagination, it's not that they're laying on the table necessarily. It's almost like they've been tossed up into the air and they're all floating there. So that's kind of where I'm just seeing how maybe it's hitting from slightly different areas. So in general, I do try to upload all of them if TikTok decides to save them. We've had some technical errors recently, unfortunately. So this is my palette that I'm going to be using on this one, and I'm going to pre-wet these little wells, and let's mix up a nice peachy color. Let me get this. How do I want to paint this? I'm going to be starting with this one here first. And then I'm going to actually, I've got in my palette, this is kind of like an opera pink, and this is kind of like a magenta, but this is bubblegum, and that one's watermelon sugar. So I'm going to start with some water in my brush and just tap that into one of those wells. I'm going to grab a little bit of that watermelon sugar, maybe a little bit of that bubblegum color, and this is the color that currently is. Then I'm going to wash my brush, and I'm going to take a teeny bit of this yellow. This is kind of similar to like a permanent yellow color. I'm going to mix that in, and that's going to give me a pretty nice grapefruit type color. So this is kind of the base color I'm going to use on my whole fruits here. I'm going to do this very similarly. So kind of like what I mentioned, these are tossed up. You could choose to have your light source always coming from the same direction in this little composition if you wanted to, or you can kind of choose to go with whatever feels natural for the fruit, depending on maybe what you're imagining. If yours are all laying down, you would want to kind of select a light source. And one of the things, if I do select a light source in my paintings, and let's just do that on this one, is I will make a little arrow on my tape just to kind of remind myself. Okay, so I'm saying my light source is coming from this direction. So it's going to be that way on all of my pieces on this one, or I will try to remember that at least. I'm going to take that peachy sugar or peachy color here, and I'm going to kind of start in that same way where I'm going to put a couple marks down, wet my brush, and then just kind of pull that around. So my light source is about there. And then I'm going to take some of that watermelon sugar color, and let's also mix in a little of that purple, maybe even a little bit of that blue color, and that's what I'm going to put as my shadow at the bottom. I can always wet my brush, move those two together. And I'm going to do the same thing where I bring in a little bit of that yellow color into a couple of these areas. If you get a little bit too much, you can always wet your brush. And let's also put just some of that straight watermelon sugar on a couple little areas here. I'm going to bring that together just a little bit and then soften some of this out down here. Again, I will probably do a second layer on this one as well. So this doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. But that's about where I'm going to leave that. Now, if, let's say hypothetically, you didn't leave this little area here, as things soak in a little bit, but before they completely dry, you can actually take your brush that's damp and then just tap here and encourage some back runs to happen, which will kind of push some of that pigment away from that area so that you can create that highlight area. Okay, let's do the same thing on this one. Again, I'm trying to remember that my light is coming from this direction, so on this one, my highlight's going to be over here. I'm going to take that same kind of peachy color I mixed up, put some water in my brush, pull it down, add some more of that. I want variation in this personally. And then I have one other thing that I'm kind of curious to try. So my shadow is going to be over here on this one. And notice that I'm not being super duper careful on this. You can kind of go for it, you know? We're doing some just kind of fun watercolor today, and you can be a little bit more loosey-goosey with this. Bring that together for that highlight. Maybe bring a little more of that peachy color here. You can modify it a little bit. Doesn't need to be perfect. Now, I do have a little theory that maybe we could use something like this texture that's on the paper towel to actually kind of lift and get some of that texture of the rind. Let's see what happens. I don't know if this is actually going to work. I just kind of been thinking about this. So let's try it. And that does give me a little texture. So that's an option. And then we want to do the same thing we did before, where we're going to place some of those same colors. I actually need to mix up a little bit more of my peachy color because I'm running out. So I'm going to put a little bit more water in here. And I'm mixing primarily that watermelon sugar with that permanent yellow type color and a little bubble gum to make it a little more of that kind of grapefruit type color. You can always add in a little more water to desaturate that. And then we're going to add this to our rinds, leaving a little white space between that and our segments. Maybe put a little bit of some of that yellow on the area that's kind of the light is coming from. Perhaps putting a little of that purpley blue on the opposite side just to kind of show a little bit of that shadowing. Same thing over here. The last class that we did, we focused on a lot of kind of more technical things. And so today's class is a way for us to kind of get away from some of that. And this one, I want to challenge you to be looser and kind of go with the flow a little bit more. Just let some of the natural things happen with watercolor and let go of a little bit of control. Same thing here. There's so much to learn about watercolor, and there are so many different things that you can control with watercolor. But a lot of times, I feel like this is a cycle that a lot of people go through with different art forms. I know I do, where you start off and you have no control, but you have so little control that it doesn't quite have some of the same effects you want. And then you start to learn the control parts of it. And so then you lose any freedom you have. And then you start to kind of have this push and pull of, well, I want it to be a little bit more free flowing. So we have to then kind of fight against the nature of wanting to over control everything. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing today. Let it go. Don't overthink every brush stroke. Kind of let what happens, happens. You can channel your inner Elsa and just let it go. All right, so here's where I am with that. The next thing I need to do is I'm going to take this color, that kind of peachy color I mixed up. I'm going to put another brush full of water in it just to desaturate it a little bit. And then I'm going to do that exact same thing I did before, where I'm going to be putting in some little pieces of pulp. And I didn't really mention this before. I'm pretty sure you probably noticed this, but I'm changing the direction in which I'm making these little swipes so they all kind of go towards the center. Because with citrus, that's kind of, the pulp all kind of aligns and runs in one direction in each of the little segments. You started painting this week? That's so exciting. I love, just so you guys know, yeah, when you guys send me pictures and messages, it absolutely brightens my day. I remember the years that I spent not painting and creating, and even when I just started and nothing was great, that freedom that I felt just sitting down to do this was so amazing. And so it really brings me a lot of joy just to know that somebody else is taking the time to do this and having a little fun. I know it can be hard to actually take the time to paint because sometimes it feels like, well, if it's not good, then it's not worthwhile, or sometimes it even sometimes feels like a selfish activity to take the time to do some of this. But man, sometimes when I'm painting, that's when all my emotions kind of settle themselves. It's like my brain is occupied enough for some of the bigger thoughts that I'm having to kind of work themselves out. As a chronic overthinker, oh my goodness, I'm right there with you. So yes, it does help me a lot. Okay, so we're at the same stage in both of our paintings. Let's just kind of do a little recap. So here's one. This is on 140-pound Canson paper using my palette. And then this is on the Arches paper using the Koi palette. So a couple things to notice. One, if you are using Arches paper, I absolutely love it. The one thing I don't like about Arches paper is how long it takes to dry. Even though I did this way earlier, these grapefruits, they are about the same level of dryness as these ones here. So I can't actually do my second layer on those quite yet on the actual fruit parts. But I can come in and I can make another layer of the pulpy parts on the insides of the grapefruits with the Koi palette. And for those of you who don't already know this, I know many of you do know this, you can make things dry faster using a hairdryer. I don't tend to do that in live just because I like to keep things, I know people do use the hairdryer on live, but I kind of like to think of this as like a really calming, peaceful time. And I don't know, something about then exposing you guys to a really loud hairdryer makes it feel a lot less calm to me. So, or a lot less calming. So I'm going to, I avoid doing that. So here's the color that we used for the pulp to begin with. I actually want to change this color a little bit. One of the first things I'm going to do is add a little more water into it just to kind of desaturate it just a little bit. And then I think I want this layer to be a little pinker, so I'm going to take this magenta type color and add that in here. We don't need it to change hugely, we just need to change it a little bit. So let's do a quick check to see what that color looks like next to this one. As you can see, it's different, but not totally different. I mean, I think I might want it to be just a little pinker. And mix that in. That's just a little bit pinker, so that will be perfect. Again, I'm going to do the exact same thing. You could also vary how many you do for each layer, so maybe if you have a really dark color, you just want a couple of them in there. You could change yours to be more of a purple or more of a yellow if that's what you're feeling. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing in this step. As long as you're adding in a different color with at least a few little marks, it's going to have kind of the same effect. But if you're like, I don't want more pink, I want mine to be a little more yellow or something like that, go for it. I did not pre-cut this Arches paper. This is just a little pad. I did a test of their normal cold press, of their hot press, and then this is the rough grain, which I ended up really liking this rough grain one. But this was just the cheapest way for me to buy it because they're the smallest little ones that they have. And this is also a block. If you are getting Arches paper, you don't, I mean, the normal paper is good too, but I really like the ones that come in the block form because then you don't have to tape anything down. It stays nice and flat for you. It doesn't move around, and it makes it a little more portable and just kind of, I don't know, it feels a little bit sturdier to me. And then in general, I do cut a lot of my own paper. And this is my go-to paper cutter while we're waiting for just a minute. It seems like we might be a little frozen for at least a few people. But I use this one. One of the reasons why is this blade is replaceable. Some of the other ones, you can't actually replace the blade. So as soon as it is dull, it's useless. But this one, you can buy little replacement blades. And then it also, this part pops out so you can measure much longer pieces of paper, which I find super nice because I don't like to have to like draw the lines first. I like to just kind of pop it in here. And I do have a favorite paintbrush. And I am quite biased because I have this paintbrush made. So this is a size 12 round brush with a nice tip. This is actually the one, you can see a little bend in it, just a teeny bend in that part. This is the one that I salvaged. I don't know if anybody saw that video yesterday where I did take, I can't remember who said it in live, but I had completely ruined it. This one was like completely bent over. And somebody said put it in hot water, and I did. And it is like 98% fixed. There's still a little area I kind of want to fix, but I didn't do it for quite as long as I think I needed to. Where did I get that from? It's so cool. I don't know if you're referring to the Arches paper. The Arches paper I bought from Jerry's Artorama, and then this is one that I sell. All right, so we still need these parts to dry just a little bit more before I can do a second layer on them. We added in a second layer of pulp with a slightly different color. And let's come back over to this one that I'm using my palette on. And we want to do the same thing. I want to add in a second color layer of the pulpy ones. And on this one, I was using a much more pink color for my very first layer. So this is the color that it was for the first layer of pulp. And I think I want mine to be a little bit more kind of orangey. Heard you do hot water and then dip into watercolor binder. Oh my God, that's probably so smart. I just dipped mine into hot water and it seemed to have fixed it about 98% of the way. I do have some watercolor binder because I've been making watercolor recently, so I should try doing that part of it too. All right, I'm going to make mine a little bit more orangey just by adding in a little bit of that yellow here. Let's test. It is a little bit different, and that's a little more the color that I want for my second layer of pulp. So again, I'm going to do the same thing where I just kind of go throughout and make these little marks. Anybody have any fun plans for today other than the watercolor class? Let me rewind here. I forgot to set up my iPad so I could see a little bit better the comments and things like that today. I'm a little space cadet-y. I was doing my plant watering before this, and then I ran out of time, and I didn't have breakfast or anything. I totally forgot what time it was. And then it was suddenly time to start the class. You're going to a yarn store? Ooh, you family visiting? That's fun. Starting a new journal. Sick in bed? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. There was a question about class. I've got a couple things. I do have a YouTube channel where I've got some information. I mean, you can watch all the Learn Watercolor one TikTok at a time as well. I go through pretty much all of the basics through that, everything from mixing color to some supply stuff. And then I do also, if you prefer to just sit down and actually do a whole class, I do have a class that you do have to pay for. That's you can find on my website. But yeah, all that information is definitely out there, just in some slightly different formats with some different information presented in different places and a little easier or harder to access, basically. Bedtime for you? Oh, are you over in Europe? All right, so we've added a second layer here. Now, these are still a little bit wet, so I'm going to wait to actually do another layer on those. Let's take a look on the arches one. Baking cookies and watching a movie. Oh, that's fun. Okay, I think these are dry enough to actually do a second layer. Now, in general, what I just did there is not something I recommend doing. If you are going to be checking the dryness, if you did this and it was still wet, you'd actually pull up some of that pigment. So that's not ideal, what I just did, but I did it, and well, here we are. In general, if you do want to check the general wetness, I actually just recommend hovering your hand or your wrist over. If you feel a lot of coolness coming from the page, it's still pretty wet. You've watched those ones, feel a little lost? Yeah, so the class that I designed that you can find through my website, it's actually hosted on a site called Teachable, but you can find links to it through my website. And that is one where we literally go through everything from start to finish. And the idea is that it's going to kind of like, it's like, okay, literally let's open our palette. Let's learn how to mix colors. Let's talk a little bit about color mixing. And it's supposed to give you kind of a grasp on all of the basics so that if you're just overwhelmed, I can kind of hold your hand through it. Because I know I had to do the same thing when I started silversmithing. I found an online course, and then I also found somebody in person who really just kind of held my hand through the whole thing. And then once I had all the basics down, I was ready to go. Yes, do as I say, not as I do. Are you guys talking about starting a new journal? Yeah, the first page. So I got a new bullet journal too, and I messed up on the very first page, and I can't even rip it out because on the opposite side of that page, it's got like the calendar for the year that I had already written stuff on. Oh well. 15-minute challenges, that's fun. Yes, I do have snow right now. I can see it in my little window well here. All right, so we're going to do a second layer. Or if you like how your grapefruits look, you don't have to do a second layer. I personally feel like they could use a little zhuzhing, so I'm going to do that. And good news is we've got a first base layer on, and so pretty much anything you do to the second layer, other than like if you added way, way too much pigment, but pretty much everything you do is going to be a little bit more forgiving within these because we already have a base layer to paint on top of. Yeah, the bullet journal. So I do my bullet journals a little bit different. Before I talk about that, I am going to kind of start with the similar type theory where I'm going to mix up a little bit more of a peachy type color. And for this layer, I'm going to I've got some of that magenta right here and I've got some of that yellow. Let's just see if we can just mix those two together and see what color that makes. All right, that's what that is there. I want it to be a little more magenta-y. So let's make it a little pinker. We're getting closer, a little more pink. So one of the things I did this year, this is more the color, but it's not the saturation. So I'm going to grab some water and drop that in. This year I actually cut myself a couple stamps to help me track the certain things. Because I actually treat mine more like a bulleted to-do list. And then I try to make sure mine's really adaptable. So if I don't feel like doing something one week, it doesn't stop me from doing my bullet journal. Because I figured doing it is better than not doing it. Doing it wrong, I suppose. All right, so I've got kind of a nice peachy color. And that was just that yellow with a little bit of that magenta color. And I actually think that might have been the lemon yellow that I mixed in there. These classes are most Saturdays at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. All right, I'm going to start with this one because it's the one I did first last time. I'm trying to figure out how to get all of this in frame. I'm going to grab some of this peachy color. And again, I'm going to kind of start in the similar way I did before, where I'd place a little of this color, wet my brush, move it around. I want that color to kind of flow around this. Maybe bring in a little of that yellow into some areas. Bring that same peachy color. I'm going to grab, this is some purple that I've got right down here, and I'm just going to grab that and put that opposing where I've placed my highlight. A little more of that peachy color. And then I'm going to take some fresh water and I'm going to just place that right in that highlight to kind of push some of that away. Maybe lift out a little of that color that's there. And there we go. I like that a lot better. It's bumped up the pigment. I feel like that highlight's better. I feel like the shadow's a little bit better. Your mouth is watering. I know, I want a grapefruit. I know, the layouts online are so beautiful, but I think the one thing to keep in mind is the layouts you see online, Those people are basically doing that as a job. I mean, their whole, well, not all of them, but a lot of their shtick is that's what they do. So they can spend hours on it. All right, I'm doing the same kind of treatment over here. Again, I'm going to kind of lift out some of that. I'm also going to bump up this shadow over here to kind of cover that one area that was a little weird. And let's put a little orange in there too. I don't know, I'm just kind of feeling a little orange right there. You know, it's kind of, I love talking about, this whole conversation of whatever works for you. And so that is something I want to bring up. If there's something you see I do and you're like, I don't like doing that, that's fine. If you have a way that works better for you, I'm just happy that you're painting. A few years ago, I really came to the conclusion in a lot of things in my life, even like things like working out. I used to try to stick to a strict regiment of like, now I'm doing this thing or whatever. And then I would get so burnt out on it. And so my theory was like, I'm just going to do whatever I feel like doing. So even if I have goals but I feel like dancing instead, then I'm just going to dance. All right, so I've added some extra layers here. We might as well throw in another layer of that pulp because that's what we're just kind of doing, is layering in that pulp as we go along. And I'm going to go for some low light ones. So I'm actually going to take some of this peachy color with a little bit of this purple just to add in a couple low lights. And I'm going to be kind of lighter on this one, so I might only put in a couple of those. Just a couple of them. All right, so let's do a little status update. Here's where we are on these ones here. I really bumped up the color on these grapefruits. I'm kind of loving, especially this one. This one I'm still not entirely sold on, but this one I really like. This one makes me want to eat a grapefruit for sure. And I am liking where I'm at in the layering of the pulp, which I can kind of pause on for a little bit. I'm going to again switch over to my other one. And my other palette. And I want to add in a second layer on these because I do like these, and I'm kind of thinking I'm going to go for a little more wild colors on this one, but I want to bump up a lot of that pigment. So I'm going to really go for it on this one. And rather than actually mixing up my color right away that I'm going to kind of be putting down here, I'm going to encourage it to mix on the page. So this is the one I'm going to kind of go for. I need to re-wet these colors too, just so I'll have a little more access to them. I'm going to start with that watermelon sugar color, and I'm just going to place this down here. Again, I'm going to dip into some water. Smooth out some of those edges. Let's grab some of that marmalade color. It's kind of like a vermilion type color. Go into a little more of those yellows. Dip into some water. I'm going to lightly kind of smooth some areas here. I'm going to take some more of this bubble gum and some more of the watermelon sugar down here. And then let's dip into both some purple and some blues for our shadow. Really just let go. And then again, I'm going to kind of do that same thing where I take some of that water and bring those together here. I think I want a little more yellow in a couple areas. Yeah, I'm sorry about the freezing issues. I wish there was something I could do to fix that, but I don't see anything on my end that I can do to fix it. It might not even be your internet. Maybe TikTok's just having some issues. I'm going to dip into some of the other colors. I'm just going to add some of this in here. Also going to lift out a little bit of that pigment there. And then I'm going to let that one be. I kind of like the crazy colors on this one. I might end up wanting to do a third layer on that, but I don't know. I kind of like how that one is. Let's do the same thing over here. Again, this is the one we're trying to treat the highlights being on all the same areas. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing where I just start with some of those colors. Be bold. Dip into some water. Thin it out a little bit. Let's try some of that red in there. Sure, why not? This is like, I think this is candy apple. Take a little more water in my brush, soften a few areas. Let's take some of that orange. Let's put some of that over here. Let's put in a little yellow. A little more of those pink colors down here. Then down into those purples. I'm not overthinking this too much. I'm just going for it. Wash my brush. We're not going for perfection, or I'm not going for perfection on this one at least. I am just going for fun and pretty colors. Blend those a little bit together. I'm going to take a little bit of this water and I'm just going to kind of encourage, I want a few of those back runs to show up just by kind of putting a few drops of water there. That should encourage a little bit of that. And again, I'm going to drop some more of that water there. Force some of that away. Maybe it's a little bit too large of a highlight. Go in between adding and then dropping water in to create those back runs, because I want some of them. Oh, did I just touch all that? I also, since I bumped up the color a lot on these, I'm going to put a little bit of some of that color throughout some of the rinds too. Maybe just on the very outside. This is just that watermelon sugar I'm just going to put right on the outside here, just to kind of bump up the colors. Yeah, the bubblegum color. I think in this palette, my favorite colors that I put in there are the watermelon sugar and that blue raspberry color. I'm just trying to bring in a little extra brightness to kind of match the energy of the whole fruits. Not trying to kind of overdo it, just adding in some. There we go. While I'm at it, might as well add in a super bright layer of that pulp. Let's just do it with this bubblegum color. Let's water it down a little bit. And let's add this in. So the good news for those of you who are wanting to stay till the end of this, is that we are going to be rounding the corner soon on having a lot of this, a lot more done than you might expect. Because sometimes these last steps really just kind of come together really quick. All right, this is the part that is a little tedious about all these different pieces of citrus, is filling in all of them. brush I'm using is a size 12 round brush. It has synthetic bristles. All right, let's switch back over to the other painting yet again. I know, we're switching back and forth. In here, we also do want to do a little ode to those little nubbins, the little stem connectors. And in here, we can use our different colors. I will say, this is the one main disappointment I have with this palette is this burnt umber color. Like almost no pigment comes out of it. This burnt sienna has beautiful pigmentation, and you can really get a lot of it. But no matter how much you really rub around into this, you get some, but it's just really opaque. So one of the things I like to do in this palette is I'll take like this burnt sienna color, and I'll mix in a little bit of purple and some blues to kind of darken it more towards that umber color. Because then I can get better saturation. And then I'm just going to kind of place that there. I'm not even going to completely fill that in. I'm just kind of making a couple little marks just to kind of do an ode to the nubbin. Sometimes they're a little green too, so if you wanted to grab a little green and put a couple little hints of that there, you could do that too. And we also do want to paint our leaves. So hopefully you will be able to watch this later. As long as it saves. So I'm just going to kind of go for it. I'm not going to mix up a color. I'm going to just grab some of this green here. And this is the leaves. We do want to be a little careful where we're placing it there because this might still be a little bit too wet. But I'm going to place some of this kind of along one side. Let's just place it along one side of all of those. Then I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to take a damp brush and I'm going to soften along the edge here. Oops, I went a little out of the lines. That's okay. Take a damp brush on this one too. Soften. Soften again. Then I'm going to take that bright green. This is kind of like a yellow green. And I'm just going to put that kind of opposing that. And I'm going to try not to touch too much of that other one. And then I'm also going to pop in a little bit of yellow into some of this, just to give it some variation. Remember, we're trying to let go. Trying to just kind of be free and go with it. Okay, so we do need to mix up one solid color for a nice light color to actually fill in these segments. This is still the one that I mixed up with the koi pans. I'm going to show you a finished version of this here. Notice how in this one here, we do have some of the layering of the different colors, but then there's also this solid color, but then intentionally not touching everywhere to kind of show the pulpy, pithy part. So we're actually going to fill in these little pizza slices with a nice light wash of a color. So, first of all, I know this is going to be too dark because I want it to be lighter, so I'm going to put some more water in here. Let me grab a little tester strip or a little piece of paper. Now let's just check in on what this color looks like. Still needs to probably be a little bit lighter, and I think I want mine to have a little more yellow in it. So I'm going to dip into that lemon yellow in the koi palette and mix that in. All right, that is, I think, the color that I want each one of those little wedges to be. Again, you are going to want your little layers of pulp to be pretty much dry in order to do this, but now we just fill in each one of these. Try to maintain some white space between the different segments. I think I need mine actually to be a little bit lighter. It's still pretty dark. It's darker than what I thought it would be. I'm going to quickly just soak up a little bit of that so it's a little bit less saturated because I want to be able to see the layers that we built underneath it. You don't need this to be perfect because on this one we didn't mask off any of those little highlights, so also try not to fill in everything. You want to fill this in the majority of the way, but maybe leave a couple little spots where you don't, so you have a little bit of that highlight. In a couple areas. And that's how we're going to actually kind of complete each one of these little slices. Keeping in mind that this is not, I would not necessarily call this like a super realistic version of a grapefruit. It's a little interpretive and also just kind of trying to let go, be free with watercolor, and let it do a little bit of what it wants. We're trying to harness the power of watercolor here. Watercolor can be used in realism to great effect, but most people when they start watercolor, you get started because you're inspired by something that's beautiful and free-flowing. Watercolor does lighten a little bit when it dries. It's going to appear darker when you swatch it and first look at it. So yes. And that also does depend on how much saturation. Like with this light of a color, it's dry over there and not over here. There's not going to be as big of a difference as like if you've mixed up a pretty saturated color. You're going to see a pretty big difference between the dry and the not dry. Okay. So the last thing that we will need to do on this, if we feel like it, and you don't have to, is to add some sort of a background to that. I need to let my leaves dry a little bit more in order to actually be able to do that. Otherwise, I could really bleed some of those colors together. I'm personally leaning towards kind of a tealy color for this, but you guys can help me vote on a background color, or if you want one. In the meantime, we can come and do some of those similar things that we just did to the other composition in this one. So let's start by adding in those little nubbins. If you have my set, you're like, well, wait, there's no brown. That's okay. Let's make a brown. So let's start with some of this kind of lime green color. And then let's add in some of that candy apple. That's going to give us kind of the start of a brown type color. And I'm going to add in a little of that blueberry muffin. And we've got the start of a brown color here. You could add in a little more of that red if you want it to be a warmer brown. But there we go. We've got a nice brown color. I'm just going to kind of drop that into some of those little nubbin areas. Not overthinking it, just kind of going in there. A grayish blue. Ooh, that could be pretty. Yeah, we can do two different backgrounds here too. So, and then again, I'm going to do the leaves on these ones. I'm going to start on this one. I'm actually going to take some of this guacamole color. I'm going to mix in a little bit of that tropical punch color in order to make a slightly darker green color. And I'm going to place that here. Let's put it here and here. So the masking fluid we're going to want to remove once everything is nice and dry. I don't know if I'll actually be able to remove it today during this class because you just rub it off and it just comes right off. I'm also going to take some of this. Ooh, let's actually take some of the banana split color. But yeah, you just rub it off and then it will come off nicely and kind of reveal some of those highlights. I'm just kind of letting the watercolor do what it wants, adding in a little water, moving it around. It's not perfect, but that's okay. We also need to fill in those segments. So again, I'm going to need to mix up more of a color here. So let's check on what this color is right here. It's a nice light color, but I want it to be a little more pigmented. I'm going to take some of that watermelon sugar. I also want this to be, I think, a little more orangey. I'm going to take a little bit of that yellow. Let's just double check. I think that will be a beautiful color for the inside, especially because I went super bright with some of those little pulp segments. So it'll kind of contrast it. I'm going to be a little bit light. And on this one, I don't have to be as careful about leaving some additional white space because that's what that white, the masking fluid that I added in before. When I do later, because I won't be able to do this now because this needs to dry fully. Otherwise, when you try to remove the masking fluid, it can rip. But my little highlights will be preserved there. And let's put this in here. Just got to put this all over. So yeah, we can do two different background colors. What are you guys thinking of the background for this one? Let's take a vote on this one. Do we want to do teal, a yellow, a blue? Or do we want to leave this one without a background? Minty color. Ooh. That could be fun. Blue, teal, yellow. No. Oh, okay. So somebody says, do you have glitter? What if I use those metallic watercolors from Dreamland Calligraphy in the background? Thoughts on that? Because I think I've got a teal metallic. Let's do a teal metallic. I like this idea. And yes, if this saves, I will post this to YouTube. I usually get around to it on like Sunday. I try to do it on Saturdays, but usually right after this class, I often do forget to eat breakfast before class. Right now I'm fantasizing about the perfectly ripe avocado I know is waiting for me after class. But yeah, sometimes I get distracted with other things I'm doing that day. Okay, so here's where we're at. We've painted the grapefruit. We've done it. Here are two. Oh no! Oh, thankfully, I think that was pretty much dry. We have painted the grapefruit. We used slightly different colors for the different ones. I leaned into different things, just depending on the palettes and the paper and stuff. And our last thing to do, if we want to, is add in a background. And I'm looking at the time, and I think I'm really only going to have time to add in the one. And let's play with the metallic one. I'm going to do a couple things with that. I'm thinking a nice bright blue teal would be really nice. So I'm going to be using this, let me find that watercolor first. Oh, yes. Okay. So I have two from Dreamland that I think would be beautiful. I've got kind of this This one's called Vast, and this one's called Saphira, and this one's kind of a teal, and this is a blue. So I'm going to, I need to let these soak a little bit before they'll actually be able to really grab much pigment. Also, I'm going to put them in this so they don't move quite as much. Okay. I think I'm going to do both of them. I'm going to rely most heavily on this lighter one, but the other thing I'm going to do so that we can see, because when I tested these, at least this one, it looked a little different on darker backgrounds than lighter backgrounds. So let's, every once in a while, we're going to dip in and also have a base teal color. We won't use it across the entire thing, but we will have some teal to also place into the background so that maybe occasionally it'll kind of mix with some darker colors. So I'm going to take over this green here and turn this into a nice blue teal color. So I'm going to take some of that tropical punch and put that in there. Take some of that blue raspberry and put that in there. A little bit more of each of those. Let's test this color. Ooh, I feel like that could be good. Maybe a little more blue. I really like this color, but just a little more blue, I'm thinking. Yes, I think that's good. Okay, so just so you know, for most watercolors, and I found this to be especially true for most metallic watercolors, you do need to give them a chance to soak in. Otherwise, you're not going to really be able to get very good saturation of the colors. So I just washed my brush. Let's see if this is moving around a lot, and it is. So I think we're good to go. But yeah, if you're having trouble, if you've got metallic watercolors that you're like, I know these are nice watercolors, why am I not getting much out of them? You probably just haven't let it soak enough and let it kind of actually become one with the water. All right, so here's what we're going to be doing. I'm probably going to have to move some of this around, so you might not be able to see all of these things. But the way I like to do my backgrounds is I like to dip into a couple different colors that are all within the same color family. And then I just move around. So I have this in my brush. This is the teal. Let's just go ahead and place this on. This is going to be my starting point. And see, this is what I was talking about on the dark versus light, because there are some kind of darker pigments in there. So then, since I have some of that in here, I'm going to then move into some of this teal color. And then I'm going to dip into a little water just to thin this out a little bit. And I'm going to intentionally not touch all of this to give it a little white outline, partially because I kind of like how that looks, and partially because I'm not entirely convinced that it's dry. I'm going to now dip into that darker blue color. And then let's go into that teal again. On this page, I have a feeling this is going to look kind of blah until it dries, so when we can actually see the actual colors. All right, let's move this around a little more. I'm going to dip into that teal metallic again. Oh yeah, I'm starting to see some of the shine. Dipping into that teal that I mixed up. Bring a little more brightness into the background again. I'm going to pause there before I bring that into that other open area, because I'm going to have my next area that I'm going to concentrate on over here. Grab a little more of that teal. Let's dip into that darker blue color. And then into that teal metallic. Let's also dip our brush into some water. Thin this out. Yeah, you know what? The kind of steeliness of the color is actually pretty nice in comparison to the super vibrant colors. It's kind of helping them pop, and so I'm really enjoying that. Let's go into that darker blue color. Although I cannot wait to see this once it dries. I think it's going to change a lot. I'm going to go into the teal color I mixed up, so this is the non-metallic, just for a little bit. And I'm not going for perfection here. I'm going for kind of an interesting background. More of that teal metallic. I'm also starting to run out of water on them, so I'm going to put a little water on top. Go back into that teal color I mixed up. Dip into some fresh water. Move it around. Let's go that dark blue again. Oh, I cannot wait to see how this dries. Into that teal metallic. Into my teal color. Yeah, the metallic does definitely bleed with the other one. And then let's do this over here. I'm going to start it with a little bit of my teal. How did everybody else do on your paintings? Do you like what you made? Is there anything you learned or want to do different next time? Let's take that teal. Oh, also while I'm finishing this off, a few of you did. I only had a couple people who sent me their address through my website. If you want one of those watercolor cards that I made over the holidays, I am happy to send it to you. You just got to send me a message through my website. But those are all at least on their way. I heard from one person that they received it, so I wasn't kidding. I will send you one of those cards because I don't know what else I'm going to do with them besides just stick them in a box. So if you do want one of those, feel free to let me know. And there we go. Ooh, all right, let's see if we can see some of this. Let me grab this light and see if we can see some of that. Okay. I don't know how well you guys can see this, but it looks like a mermaid. I love it so much. You can see it's kind of starting to dry over here. Oh yeah, I think we've stumbled onto something absolutely fantastic. I don't think this is showing up on camera as... Anybody have any tips for filming glitter and sparkles? Because I want you guys to be able to see how cool this looks. Wow, wow, wow. Oh, I love it so much. I'm so glad we decided to do that. Wow, wow, wow. Oh, I love it so much. I'm so glad we decided to do that. Yeah, I like to do the multiple colors just to give a little variation, because also then when there's kind of some changes throughout, it looks a little more intentional. I've got a little extra, too much extra water here. Grab just a little bit of that. Looks great when you move it. Yes, oh my goodness. I love it so much. So this is kind of in general what the painting looked like before we added any sort of a background, obviously with slightly different colors. I'm loving how dark and kind of slightly muted some of the metallics actually made it, because it really does make the grapefruits pop a lot. But yeah, a nice color would be good on this one too. Well, thank you again to everybody for joining. I am going to hop off and finally go have my breakfast. I hope that everybody has a really good day. If you feel like sending me pictures, the best way to do that is through Instagram, or if you like tagging me in videos on TikTok. I love seeing those too. I just know sometimes people don't like to film the process, so I understand that as well. Other than that, I hope you have an absolutely fabulous day. If this does record, I will be uploading this to YouTube so you can follow along and paint at your own pace. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. I hope everybody has a great day.